Hi, I'm Sara.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sara, what movie are we doing this week?
This week we will be talking about Trumbo. And Rena, can you give us a trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of censorship, blacklisting, imprisonment, baseball bat violence, shattered glass, John Wayne being a chicken hawk asshole, government corruption, prejudice, and naive mid-century commies. Yes, I should also mention Louis C.K. is in this movie in the interests of fairness. He was canceled for masturbating in front of female comics.
I'm going to go back and say he wasn't canceled because Louis C.K. is doing just fine.
We need a generation of men behaving decently for the female and ethnically diverse voices that would fill those spaces to bloom in a painless environment. Those voices aren't here yet. So we assume that the Louis C.K.'s are irreplaceable.
I just want to be in a world where, like, if you jerk off in front of someone and intimidate them out of the industry that they love, that there are consequences for you, like that everyone collectively recognizes that that's shameful behavior. Let's talk about all of, like, the utterly unproblematic people in this movie who dazzle and delight us to no end, because there are many of them. Rena, can you give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning! We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having absolutely nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources that we used in this episode include Hedda Hopper's Hollywood, Celebrity Gossip, and American Conservatism by Jennifer Frost, Trumbo by Bruce Cook, Blacklisted, Hollywood, the Cold War, and the First Amendment by Larry Dane Brimner. You Must Remember This, the podcast, season 6, and also the podcast Behind the Bastards did a 3-part series on John Wayne that I took a quick refresh on.
Sara, can you please tell us a little bit about our beloved Dalton Trumbo and the movie Trumbo?
I would be delighted to do so. James Dalton Trumbo was born December 1905 and passed September 1976. He was an American screenwriter who scripted many award-winning films, including Roman Holiday, Exodus, Spartacus, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. He was one of the Hollywood 10. He was blacklisted until the late 50s. We'll get into it. And he was finally given full credit by the Writers Guild for Roman Holiday in 2011, 60 years after the fact, 35 years after his death. The film Trumbo is directed by Jay Roach and written by John McNamara. The film stars Bryan, Cranston, Diane Lane, Helen Mirren, Louis C.K., Elle Fanning, John Goodman, Michael Stuhlbarg, Dean O'Gorman, David James Elliott, star of Jag on CBS as John Wayne. The film follows the life of Dalton Trumbo, specifically at this period in which he was on the blacklist. The film was released in November of 2015. It received mostly positive reviews. Bryan Cranston was nominated for a bunch of awards, including the Academy Award for Best Actor. It was an extremely modest hit. Budget was $10 million. Box office was $13.5 million.
Yes, I also wanted to shout out Alan Tudyk, who plays Ian McKellen Hunter in this. I was looking at him the whole time and wondering, this guy looks really familiar. And finally realizing, oh, he was the guy on Firefly who has one of the funniest moments in all of TV for me, where he's playing with the dinosaurs on the spaceship dashboard.
This cast is stacked.
It really is. I guess Diane Lane is an actress that I normally find rather bland, but about every 10 years or so, someone figures out what to do with her.
I love her. She is in one of my favorite movies ever, A Walk on the Moon.
She was good in, what was the one where she has the affair, which was about 10 years before Trumbo?
Oh, Unfaithful. Yeah,
yes.
She's amazing in that too. She is one of those actresses who is criminally underserved by material, like, which isn't about her as much as it's about the fact that the industry is like, yeah, no, we're not going to make a movie about women. Mm-hmm. So awards talk. This was a tour de force performance for Bryan Cranston, who was very much hot on the wave of post Breaking Bad. He was nominated for several awards, including the Academy Award for Best Actor. This was the year of The Revenant. So it was DiCaprio's year. Other people he was up against were Michael Fassbender for Steve Jobs, Matt Damon for The Martian, and Eddie Redmayne for The Danish Girl. But absolutely, like, well-deserved nomination for Bryan Cranston, who seems like a super good dude on top of that. And I love him. So you're probably going to have a very biased set of opinions on Bryan Cranston for me here, but I also do happen to think that he is just like an utterly fantastic actor. Definitely deserved an Oscar nomination for this. It was a great performance. He owns the film. It does feel very like it was supposed to get some other awards, but it didn't.
So with that, shall we get into the movie? We open on some explanation for post-1989 audiences of why people joined the Communist Party during the Great Depression and World War II, and that for a few years, the government encouraged studios to make movies that had a flattering portrayal of Russians, and then the war ended.
It makes sense that they were encouraged to do that. And like there was this sort of interesting mishmash of outspoken patriotism in the 90s, because we had one of the most outstanding propaganda machines happening in this country to get people engaged in World War II. But also, they're also like, you know what else is nice is this socialism stuff. Those two things could not continue to coexist after World War II. We see Bryan Cranston writing in the bathtub, as Dalton Trumbo did, sitting there hecking on his typewriter, drinking and smoking. And I wrote the note, "Oh, hi, Bryan Cranston in a tub. What is up?" He's not someone who you necessarily think of as a physically extreme actor, but in this movie, his posture is very stooped. And in another show that he's in that I think is at points even better acted than Breaking Bad is this batshit crazy show called Your Honor that was on Showtime. He portrays grief in this series in the second season in such a way that is like agonizing, and does so with his body in a way that's very impressive. Like he's not a showy actor.
This is Sarah's birthday episode, so we're doing Trumbo because it has two of her boyfriends, Michael Stuhlbarg and Bryan Cranston.
This movie has everything I care about in it, honestly. So we open on that. We're seeing that he is very much a limousine liberal, essentially. Because he is wealthy, he is very successful, but he's also a communist. Whatever the hell that means. It means as much to me to be a communist in 1947 as I feel like it probably meant to be, a Democrat or a Republican in 1947. Kind of skating up against Bernie Sanders, I would say, is probably about as extreme as the ideas are. He doesn't want redistribution of wealth.
The scene where he's hanging out with the composite character Arlen Hurd, who says, "I don't want one guy to own the lake." He says, "What a boring world that would be." He sees it as just having a gentler system for people.
Nothing I've seen in his work on screen or that we were hearing from this movie was like flipping my wig off in terms of being radical.
So there are conservative writers who talk about him being a Stalin apologist, but the things they're referring to are primarily pre-Khrushchev. You need to have a generational sense of nuance on the guy. So we go to a scene where they are filming a movie with Edward G. Robinson, played by
Michael Stuhlbarg, who's so wonderful in this movie.
Michael Stuhlbarg it's the U 2.0 phenomena that I talked about in Maria and a bunch of other times, where whoever plays someone in a movie is going to be that person 2.0 in terms of being more attractive. I mean, Edward G. Robinson, we've seen when they would show the 10 Commandments every year. I also watched Scarlet Street. I watched that speech about insurance from Double Indemnity. And we think of him as a gangster, but he was an incredibly versatile actor. And in real life, he was this cultured man who owned a Cezanne and a Van Gogh and a Monet. And when they're at that party where he says, please don't smoke around the paintings. But in this particular one, they are filming a movie that did not exist. This happens at least twice. The John Wayne movie that they're screening in the prison later doesn't exist. In this case, I think they wanted to get a composite of roles that Edward G. Robinson would have played. He was in a movie with a Trumbo script a few years before this, combined with things that sound like Trumbo could have written them.
And here's the thing, I agree with your 2.0 theory. I also, he is better looking than Edward G. Robinson, but I also happen to think that he is one of the most handsome men alive.
I think of him as rather plain. I think of him as I see him as a character actor, the sort of person where someone might have said, you have a face made for radio. He's certainly more attractive than Wallace Shawn.
I can't explain it to you because I've tried. I think I love him.
He is not playing Edward G. Robinson, the idea we have of him. He's playing Edward G. Robinson, the person, because, oh yes, these people in the movies do this thing called acting, Rena.
And Edward G. Robinson was a super sophisticated dude. He grew up in Romania. You find out he served as a foreign aide in the war.
And I think he would be very much in your wheelhouse if we had been born 80 years earlier.
Oh, I would have been buying Cezannes with Edward G. Robinson back in the day.
I think you would have been showing up to the auction to have him outbid you in the hope of you catching his eye.
Would I get a meet cute out of that?
Oh, I hope so.
Yes. I believe he calls him a swimming pool Soviet too. He has a couple of good lines that I thought you probably loved about communists, where he just said that they're just meaner and dumber than Democrats.
I did like that. This was one of the cases where there was so much good dialogue that I didn't bother writing anything down for choice dialogue. I was also unclear on how much of this is stuff that was written to sound like Dalton Trumbo and how much of this is stuff Trumbo actually said.
I can't imagine how daunting it is for a writer to sit down and be like, I'm going to write the way Dalton Trumbo would have talked.
Mm-hmm.
How? He's so freaking clever.
Yeah, everything he says sounds like he's test marketing it to put it into a script for another reason, except that it's off the cuff. There's that point where Louis C.K. is like, will you shut up?
Mm-hmm.
When Trumbo is just being too eloquent for him.
Yeah.
But in terms of the CK character, I think this is actually one of the best cases of doing composite characters that I've seen. There's one scene in a restaurant where there are a bunch of men sitting around a table, and he mentions names of many of the Hollywood 10, including people who were welded into the character of Arlen Hurd. But it would be so long and less effective to have him interacting with all the individual ones. It was just well done. It wasn't a case of jettisoning a more interesting story for something you think will test better in focus groups. And also the producer, Buddy Ross, who isn't real, but is a composite as well. It conveyed a truth in a way that was well done enough that I'm comfortable with it.
It's done in a way that is very organized and gets the point across. This is the kind of making stuff up that I can abide by.
I think this might be the best use of composite characters that I've seen in a biopic so far, and it was a rare case where I did not have a problem with it.
It got to the core of the suffering and the hurt that was caused to these individuals without overplaying it in a way that made the movie slow down. We go to a party and they are all yelling about communism at this party like they are at any given party that you would go to at college where someone's talking about communism.
Hedda and John Wayne both happen to be at this party, and Hedda Hopper is a monster. Helen Mirren does a fine job portraying her, and she comes across as much more human here than any information I looked up on the real Hedda Hopper. I started to hate her even more.
Yeah, garbage monster. Her and John Wayne. And we later, like, again, like with the college activities, we're later like making mimeographs about the First Amendment and handing them out at a dinner where John Wayne is speaking, and John Wayne steps to Dalton Trumbo.
I did not think that the actor playing John Wayne was all that great in this. Is it just that John Wayne was really that wooden? Or is it that my most recent image of him remains the conqueror?
John Wayne was that wooden. It's an interesting performance because David James Elliott, star of the CBS procedural for grandparents, JAG, he gets the carriage down, but John Wayne has one of those faces, not unlike other noted conservative monster Ronald Reagan, where the idea of like trying to make someone look like him would be very distracting. So he doesn't facially look like John Wayne, but he does get like the bulk and the size. And I don't know how actually tall David James Elliott is, but they make him loom physically in a way that's really intimidating and upsetting.
He does have that John Wayne walked like his balls were filled with cement.
Let me be 100% clear. He was never a good actor. He was in some things that served him as a performer, but you know, The Conqueror is, you see how much he was willing to stretch and do the work for that. He wasn't a truth-seeking performer or artist by any means. He's a garbage monster who tried to chase down Sachin Littlefeather and beat her up when she accepted Marlon Brando's Oscar. He's a terrible person. I hate him. And he's hateable here. And he's all standing up for American values like the typical conservative chicken hawk that he is, where he would never fight in a war or serve, but he will certainly get up on his high horse and yell about other people not being good Americans. So yeah, he does that. And Dalton Trumbo's like, if you're going to talk about World War II as if you personally won it, let's be clear where you were stationed. On a film set, shooting blanks, wearing makeup. And if you're going to hit me, I'd like to take off my glasses.
Oh,
I know. I was just like, oh my God, it's porn. It's porn. Like, watching Bryan Cranston dressed up as Dalton Trumbo go after John Wayne for being a total pussy, like,
yeah,
this is all I ever need. So yeah, that's their interaction, and you see set up right away is the fact that like this is going to be a problem. I just wrote, sorry, I need a cigarette. Then they're having a party at their house, and we get like a little bit of backstory on Trumbo's wife Cleo, who is played by Diane Lane in this movie, and how she was a performer. She's showing how she can juggle, which I was very impressed by that. That did not look stunted in.
She balances a glass on her head while they throw another glass at her, and then she juggles. It's really neat. And then some process server shows up in the middle of this picnic, and this is right after he has signed a contract to become the highest paid screenwriter, which he signs with Louis B. Mayer, and Louis B. Mayer gives him, like, getting a compliment out of a studio person this big. These guys are all assholes and it's hard, and he says to him, you don't just write happy endings, you believe them.
Yeah, Louis B. Mayer was not a good guy. You know who he was awful to? Judy Garland. I'm sure that's shocking. He sucked. I'm sure he also gave her drugs, because everybody gave her drugs.
But he did not suck as much as Hedda, who is a raging anti-Semite, and we'll get to that.
Yeah, she's garbage also. So we've got these two garbage monsters who are like, I don't know, he's kind of a communist. And he gets served to testify in front of HUAC. And
everyone gathers at Edward G. Robinson's house. And this is another case of using a composite, because I ran a search on Bruce Cook's book that was the primary source for this movie. And Edward G. Robinson is mentioned 4 times in the course of it. So I think they use him as a composite of people who were supportive and backed out. And there were cases of Hollywood rallying for free speech at the beginning of this that everyone had to backtrack. Humphrey Bogart would subsequently write, I'm sure he didn't write it himself, but it was some piece that he wrote where he was like, boy, what a dope I was.
Yeah, like you hear Lucille Ball on the radio saying, like, we have to protect the First Amendment, and he's going off to testify and knows that they're going to defy a congressional subpoena and be in contempt of Congress and be found guilty for that. But because there's liberal Supreme Court justices, it's going to be okay. It's going to get overturned. He is found in contempt of Congress and he is convicted of it initially, and they're going to take it to the Supreme Court, and then 2 Supreme Court justices die real fast, and Truman appoints some judges who are not as sympathetic to the First Amendment.
We encounter the rather insufferable but skillfully drawn Arlen Hurd, who is again a composite, and also Ian McKellen Hunter, played by Alan Tudyk.
I think that one of the things this movie does a really good job in drawing between Arlen Hurd and Trumbo is the fact that not all of these writers are making the kind of money that Dalton Trumbo is making, and they don't have the same kind of cushion or support or name or, like sort of level of comfort from which to attack institutions. Like someone like an Arlen Hurd or some of these other members of the Hollywood 10 really had to put it on the line and truly suffered.
And there were people who were in the next edition and the next edition and the edition after that, after the Hollywood 10, who were on their way up or on their way down, who never recovered from the blacklist.
Yeah.
Who wound up cleaning swimming pools and selling shoes and waiting tables. There were writers who still didn't get their first post-blacklist credit for another 10 years after Trumbo, if ever. Like, Trumbo is a privileged case.
It is a really well-executed composite, and I do have to give him credit, as much as I hate to do that, and separate the art from the artist a little bit here and say that he plays it really well and doesn't overlay it. And we see them testify and they all decline to comment, and it's rough. And
there's an unfairness here because people like the now mostly forgotten Robert Taylor, who is Mr. Barbara Stanwyck at one point, the people who were showing up as friendly witnesses got to talk all about things in context and their narrative. The so-called unfriendly witnesses didn't get an opportunity they were asked pointed, loaded questions and told, say yes or no, and it was not a fair process. There does not appear to have been anyone coming at, I guess, counter-questioning.
You get a nice little taste of how fucked up this was.
Yeah.
In this movie and how fruitlessly cruel it was too.
They weave in actual footage of people really well. One thing they do really well later is, since the actor they found to play Kirk Douglas, the problem is that Kirk Douglas's chin dimple is, I'm saying this in a flattering way, it is a case of genetic mutation on the level of Anya Taylor-Joy's eyes. You cannot imitate that. But they do a really good job interweaving scenes of this actor who, again, is a spot on Kirk Douglas into the Spartacus footage, but I found myself looking at the Nixon footage and thinking, God, that guy had a Doonesbury nose. Was his nose really that pointy? He looks like Pinocchio.
He was an insanely unattractive individual.
He really was.
And then we find out also that Louis C.K. has cancer. There was a good moment here too, like a good line delivery where Trumbo says to him, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And he's like, "No, it's cancer." Because of this Supreme Court stuff, like they're going to jail, and they all go to jail.
Another thing that did not happen in real life was that the New Jersey congressman who brought them did not actually go to the same jail as Trumbo, because there is the great line, the difference between us is that you actually committed a crime. Trumbo goes to jail, he kisses his family goodbye, and he loses a year of his life.
In prison, he meets the most amazing character, and I'm going to attempt to pronounce his name.
Please forgive us. Sara is going to mangle this actor's name, and we're probably going to forget the correct pronunciation if we have to say it a second time.
It's Adewale Akinoye Agabaje.
He is so good. I loved this character. I loved how he messes with Trumbo's head. Like, he has his stereotype of the swimming pool Soviet, where he's like, he's like, I can't read. And then Trumbo gets this look of compassion on his face and is like, he just like made that up. And he asks him about John Wayne, and Trumbo's like, yeah, you would get along. The thing that finally gets Trumbo cred with this guy is when Edward G. Robinson snitches and he says to him, if that happened in here, he'd be dead.
In real life, Edward G. Robinson was called to testify, I think, 4 times before he finally broke down. And it illustrates the shitty position all of these individuals were put in.
I loved this relationship in miniature. I don't know where this character came from, but I loved how the character defies stereotypes. And also I loved that the thing that finally makes him react to Trumbo as a fellow is seeing Trumbo having to watch that betrayal on TV, and that he speaks to him in the language of prison cred. Not, hey, can you tell me all about communism now? That's not going to happen.
It's an amazing circumvention too of the magical Negro trope as well. I loved this performance. Then he gets out and things are not great. It is like the scene in Goodfellas when Henry gets out, except nothing is going to get better anytime soon.
They have to sell the ranch. They skip over the Trumbo family's 2-year sojourn in Mexico City. Trumbo was terrible with money his whole life. He did not know how to save, which may have been why he was so pro-redistribution. I'm fine with it that they leave this out, because it's a digression. If you're going to show them in Mexico City, you're going to need to do a montage. This movie does not overuse the montage. I love the storytelling style. It avoided many of the cliches. It did not feel and then-y to me. No furniture was broken.
There was some yelling.
John Goodman breaks some glass. They moved to another house in one of the Los Angeles neighborhoods that still looks quite nice to me and probably would cost at least $2 or $3 million these days, where there's a swimming pool and they have a crud neighbor that fills it with dead animals or something.
His neighbor sucks. He sells Roman Holiday, but Ian has to put his name on it.
Yes, Wash from Firefly shows up. Ian himself is about to get blacklisted, but the thing, it scrapes under the wire. This happens before he goes to prison, actually, that he sells the thing. Diane Lane is having trouble paying all of the people who are making modifications to this ranch that they cannot afford. But he shows up and he's like, honey, we're rich. I heard a letter that he wrote to the phone company where he's asking them, can you put speakers into the house so that my wife and I can hear our daughter in the other? And it's his letters to the phone company still sound like writing a speech in a big drama. It's the guy was a constant natural writer. Yeah, they move in next door to this crud neighbor, and I did think that the substitution of child actors felt a little bit jumpy to me, but I'll forgive it. We get a Nikki replacement, and welcome to the podcast, Elle Fanning.
Yes, it won't be your last time here this month. She's very good in this movie.
She has a bunch of years to play her in, and they also do a good job at the end aging her up to 1970 because she was quite young here. They're living next door to the crud neighbor. And welcome to the show, John Goodman. This is another thing where IRL, he had already reached out to the King brothers before, like way earlier in the story. But, oh gosh, John Goodman and Stephen Root are so good in this. John Goodman delivers my favorite monologue of the film a bit later, and it's all in the delivery.
He is such a good actor. I love watching him work. Anytime you get the chance to watch John Goodman do John Goodman, he's amazing.
The King brothers, and yes, another case of Jews who changed their names. If you ever get around to reading People Love Dead Jews by Dara Horn, the thing about, they changed our name at Ellis Island is garbage. It was more a case of Jews arriving in this country and realizing that their employment prospects weren't so great with a Jewish name, and changing their name after they were already in the Golden Country because it wasn't so great here. Anyway, there is that point where Hedda Hopper goes to talk to Louis B. Mayer, and she flirts with him, and it seems congenial, and she's just doing her tricks of the trade to get what she wants, and then she brings up that all of you came from, and she says shtetl so nastily, and what their names were, and then she uses the word that starts with a K and rhymes with bikes.
Yeah.
The actor playing Louis B. Mayer does a really good job. You're showing the reaction in his face, and it's like, he still has to deal with this garbage, no matter how big he gets.
It just gets into that, like the quotidian fear of a time period like this, where it's not dramatic, it's not over the top, it's just that there were enough people who were bad enough to push around enough people who weren't bad enough, but had shit to lose and could be made to feel afraid. So he's going to work for the King brothers, and he starts to bring opportunities around to his other blacklisted friends, and they're all writing these schlocky movies.
Yeah. And this is so good. There's this part where John Goodman comes in and he's like, I love this script, and then throws down 5 more and they all sound like garbage. And there's also payoff on how when you walk into the King brothers, you see a guy walking in with a gorilla suit, and it pays off when John Goodman says, we bought a gorilla suit, so we got to use it. And Dalton Trumbo thinks they're joking, and it's like, no. And then McKellen Hunter, who, despite having supposedly written Roman Holiday, is about to get blacklisted himself, says, who doesn't want to write a gorilla movie? Another thing I appreciated here, when they show how his working process for writing, I loved seeing a portrayal of functional addiction.
Yes.
Where it does not hit a rock bottom movie substance abuse stereotype point. You see how he abuses substances to cope or to self-medicate, or that he's always adding a little bit of hard brown liquor to the coffee. He is constantly smoking. He has uppers in his desk. You see him bugging out at his family, because this is all incredibly stressful for the Trumbos. It becomes a family business selling fake scripts. And it's all part of his project to break the blacklist, which is that if all scripts are being ghost written by blacklisted people, eventually the thing is going to collapse.
Functional addiction, and also I think I love watching creative people work. He was constantly doing the work, and you see the process, and I'm obsessed with seeing process, because I think that it's important for people to understand that creative people work their butts off. And we also see where it's not great for his family, because he's a workaholic and he's super focused insist on doing this and not stopping, and he's under the gun. And in the meantime, we're seeing that Louis C.K. is getting sicker and his wife has left him and he dies essentially destitute. And, and that's the blacklist. That's what it did.
Oh, you get the sense that Louis C.K.'s character, that whatever scripts he wrote were much more Grapes of Wrath wannabe than, say, Roman Holiday, where he's been given the script to write about the alien and the farm girl. I don't know if this was actually a King Brothers movie where John Goodman loves everyone else's work and he's like, I don't want to hear the alien making speeches about workers' rights. And I loved this conversation that Arlen Hurd and Dalton Trumbo have where they're talking about that Dalton Trumbo has ascribed something that's human to the alien, where he's like, oh no, he's in love with the farm girl because she reminds him of the girl from back home. And where Louis C.K. says, wouldn't she have a bug head? Yeah.
So good. So damn delightful.
You see how the blacklist had casualties.
After he goes to Louis C.K.'s funeral, he comes back to see Edward G. Robinson, who has testified and scraped and bowed to John Wayne and been given the opportunity to go back to work after a year of just being passed over and ignored and not even getting auditions. He elicits sympathy for me because he is such a good actor, and this is such a good scene where Edward G. Robinson is saying to him, I can't hide behind a name, I can't hide behind a fake face.
I guess he could go to Japan and do kabuki theater.
Yeah.
No.
But he can't. And and he does call him out on it, and it's complicated. It all seems very easy from a safe distance from the past to say like, oh, well, I would never. It's like there was a cost to every single person. He also calls him out and he's like, listen, you and your stand is one of the reasons why your friend is dead. Like, he's not directly responsible for, he didn't give Louis C.K. cancer. Well, however, like,
no, they all smoke like chimneys.
But like the human toll of giving up everything for the cause is significant, and they're all questioning it. It's well executed here, and again, because I think Stolberg is like one of the best. He can elicit sympathy. Like, I was like watching Dope Sick, the miniseries he's in, where he plays Arthur Sackler. Because he is such a good actor, I'm like, oh, I kind of feel bad for him here. Like, he's that good. He had to look out for himself, and like that happened to so many people, and they were maligned for it. And he leaves him the money that he loaned, or that he gave them from the painting that he sold, and it's pretty sad. And then
they were bros. Moving along, Trumbo writes that script that he'd mentioned to Arlen Hurd about the bullfight. Well,
he brings an Academy Award-winning screenplay to the King brothers.
Yes. Somewhere in here, his friend Buddy Ross is paying him money to fix a script. You see the parade of non-courageous studio executives, and just how awful it is for someone to like not acknowledge you in public when they've come to you desperately in private. Trumbo and the King brothers are the ones who are consistently real men throughout this, in terms of good things that we mean when we say real men. But my favorite, I guess this could be my favorite part of the whole picture, is when someone from their motion picture Alliance for American Values or whatever it is comes to talk to John Goodman. And it isn't in the words, it's in the delivery. But the best sentence of it is, I make garbage.
I love this so much. Oh my God. John Goodman just picks up a baseball bat and tells this guy where he can get off.
Yeah, and this guy is actually scared out of there, which is amazing. I'm not sure who won Best Supporting that year, but it should have been John Goodman for this particular speech.
Oh, I have it up. Want to keep me from hiring union? I'll go downtown, hire a bunch of winos and hookers. It doesn't matter. I make garbage. You want to call me a pinko in the papers? Do it. None of the people that go to my fucking movies can read.
And he's swinging the baseball bat, and he like is holding the baseball bat to the guy's throat. And there is broken glass everywhere. And he tells the secretary to show the gentleman out. And I think that was the moment where I saw this movie when it was in theaters, and that was the moment from it that stayed in my head the most, as in, God, I want to watch this again, is I make garbage.
We give Kirk Douglas and Otto Preminger an awful lot of credit for ending the blacklist, but honestly, Frank King ended the blacklist.
As someone being a non-idealist, being a businessman, realizing he could get better scripts at cut rate, but that sets the ground.
Someone just being like, you know what? I don't care. This is stupid. And I am going to hire the people who are going to do good work for me. And all of this is bullshit.
Yeah.
Honestly, Frank King is the man who broke the blacklist.
This very flustered fascist is leaving, and I feel bad for the janitors who have to, right. And on another note, around the swimming pool socialists. At one point earlier in the film, you see that the Trumbos have a black maid wearing a uniform.
Yeah.
Anywho, Trumbo shows up with the script for The Brave One, and Frank King asks him, is it expensive? And he says, worse, it's good. So he gets an Academy Award nomination under the name Robert Rich, and no one is there to accept it. And Hedda is ballistic.
She's so unhappy. She's basically like really starts to dope out. Like, Dalton Trumbo's writing movies and people are making them. And I said that's not supposed to happen. So she's furious and she is sniffing around on this.
She is a monster. And I tried to find good things about Hedda, and all I could that she did feel that women should get equal pay for equal work, but she's against the Civil Rights Act.
So Trumbo starts kind of like teasing out like, yeah, maybe I did write it. I love these rumors. We need to end the blacklist.
Kirk Douglas appears in the movie earlier. Like this movie is very good at like setting up people dropping in, because they show Kirk Douglas on the Academy Awards when Roman Holiday wins.
So Kirk Douglas shows up and he's like, I need to clean up on the screenplay, which we discussed on the Spartacus episode, that the initial screenplay needed a real workover.
The problem wasn't that it was 7 hours long. It was I think it was actually too short, and it was all like speeches of telling, not showing, that Howard Fast had written that were just way too on the nose about the workers' struggle, which is a case of extreme lefties making art just as bad as the right wing.
Yeah, not great.
Yeah, this actor, what's his name?
His name is Dean O'Gorman.
Yeah, and they also do a very good job getting the film stock for the Spartacus scenes to rematch when they film Dean O'Gorman. Like, he is Kirk Douglas.
They actually had me fooled for a minute where I was like, are we about to watch a scene from Spartacus in full? And then he was cut in there and I was like, okay, nope, but close enough.
On the note with all the people who went off the rocker about the flat top, his hair does look less extremely flat topped here than it did in the real Spartacus, and I don't frickin' care.
I'm not sweating that hairdo anymore. He comes and he asks for a rewrite. So it's Christmas time, and who should show up in a 3-piece suit on the doorstep of the Trumbo's house but Otto Preminger?
I am Otto Preminger, the director. He has the Schwarzenegger accent.
I don't know what Otto Preminger is like in real life. From now on, this is all I care to think that he was
that he always wears a 3-piece suit, is always in a Rolls, and whenever he needs to explain something, every 6th sentence out of his mouth is, I am Otto Preminger, the director.
Yes, I want that to be I want that to be real. And he says, I have this book. It's a piece of shit, but you can make it something good, which is the book Exodus.
Exodus is not a piece of, it is a gripping mass market story. It is not Joyce, is not Hemingway. I wouldn't describe it as Steinbeck, but for an example of what it is very, very well done. I wept over it when I was 10.
It's a mass market bestseller that was well regarded. It's a Ken Follett. Leon Uris is a good writer. He's fine. I sometimes long for monoculture again, and this is part of like monoculture where everybody read this book when it came out.
Yeah, and the New Year's Eve that I was 10, we watched Exodus. I sobbed myself to sleep. I was not okay for like a week, and then I read the book again, sobbed, was not okay for a week. Otto Preminger shows up.
And stands over him and is like, if you keep writing this like this, I am going to put your name on the screen so everyone can figure out who to blame.
I have to admit, I also loved that you had 2 Jews messing up the Trumbo family Christmas, and I was like, yeah, this is for every time that I had to give up vacation days because the high holy days are not American holidays, and then had this useless day off in December. Honestly, I took joy in Kirk Douglas and Otto Preminger messing up someone's Christmas.
I'm sure of it, that he ruined holidays for everyone all the time. Nikki points out to him, she's like, our neighbor over there, the one who threw all the dead animals in their pool, like, you don't think he's smart enough to have been watching us and see that strange Austrian man in a 3-piece suit and Kirk Douglas keep showing up at our house, and he wouldn't call that in. He would. She's like, they can't do anything.
Has this neighbor never heard "don't snitch"?
That neighbor snitches 100%.
Yeah, I want to sick all the prison friends on the neighbor.
Trumbo's like, you're right. So he finally owns up to the fact, like, yes, that's my screenplay, and yes, we've all been working. Like, his screenplay was the brave one.
Yeah, and you know what? If these anti-communists couldn't put out material of enough quality that Hollywood didn't need to hire from the blacklist, like the composite Buddy Ross, he had no script to film that thing with.
These were voices that were absent, that were needed. And even though Mr. King did what needed to be done to start the destruction of the blacklist, we see that Kirk Douglas and Otto Preminger effectively end it by saying in public, in the newspapers, Dalton Trumbo is writing our movies and you can suck it. Hedda Hopper tries to threaten Kirk Douglas, and Kirk Douglas is like 2 middle fingers at her. He's like, yeah, I've always been a bastard.
There's that thing with the studio exec who they give him a list of 50 names and he says they're all garbage. Kirk Douglas was a canny businessman and someone who, on top of that, appreciated real art. And he, where he says, fine, replace me. God, I love this line because for better or for worse, I am Spartacus.
Ugh. Also, this actor, he did. I'm sure he didn't.
I'm sure he didn't. May his memory be a blessing. I'm sure that he would like to think he did. And I got so sick reading about Hedda Hopper that I went and I read Kirk Douglas's book about, even though he exaggerated his role, he was a salesman and a showman. And I mean, it shows that it's sort of simultaneous and that Preminger was gets for how Preminger gets first credit. Another thing it doesn't show is what happened a year or so before with the script for the Oscar for The Defiant Ones, which you can go read about. But we get to the premiere for Spartacus and they come home and Cleo starts crying and says, "It's over, isn't it?"
And then we end with a really nice epilogue that is Trumbo's words, accepting a Writers Guild Award, where he talks about, I think this is a really generous epitaph on it. And also he's the right person to give it as someone who was in the center of it. Obviously it happened, but it's the Hollywood ending that this story also deserved, in terms of him being this is a terrible thing that happened. And he does touch on all of the humanity in the midst of all of it. And we also see Hedda Hopper, just evil temporarily defeated. It always fucking comes back, kids. But realizing that Spartacus is a huge hit, JFK sees it effectively putting the final nail in the coffin of the blacklist, that was based on a book by a communist, written by a communist, and made by Stanley Kubrick, who I don't know what he believes in. Basically, she sees her way of thinking and being sunsetted.
Well, she was very excited about the Goldwater campaign, but she did not live to see Reaganism. Usually if something nice happens after a person dies, I'm like, oh, what a shame they didn't get to see that. And if something bad happens after a person dies, I think it's lucky they didn't see that. But this was a case where I was like, gosh, I'm glad they didn't live to see that thing that would have made them very happy. Helen Mirren humanizes her in a way that it becomes impossible once you actually start to read about the real Hedda Hopper.
Yeah, Mirren is too generous to this character.
Remember, you are your character's lawyer. If she weren't being generous, it would be a two-dimensional mustache twirler, and Mirren gives it that sense that, oh, she wants what her son is doing in the military to matter. And also that we didn't know that we were going to win the Cold War.
I don't have a ton of compassion for her, because it's sad, because you see the way this humanly came about, and you see the way it humanly fell, and it's a credit to anyone who has a position of power to see them use it for good. To see Otto Preminger and Kirk Douglas both be like, we're powerful people who can do whatever the hell we want.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't care.
They're doing that with enough time having gone by and enough little steps along the way, because there were people with that much power who tried to stand up to HUAC in 1947 and tried having to walk it back. Yeah. If Bogey and Bacall couldn't fix it, nobody could have.
It's true. It's true. It's so sad.
So, we did awards talk early. Do you have any choice dialogue, Sarah?
The whole darn screenplay is a choice dialogue, honestly.
My picks were, this is the one that Arlen Hurd rolls his eyes at, where it's the one where he's like, will you shut up after this? But where Trumbo says, the radical may fight with the purity of Jesus, but the rich guy wins with the cunning of Satan. And my previously cited, I make garbage. I love you, John Goodman.
Yeah. God bless John Goodman.
Yes, welcome to the show. We will see you in a few months in Sweet Dreams during Plane Crash Month. Shall we score this thing? Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
I'd be happy to. We rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specially tailored to specific issues particular to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
Rapid fire.
Outward appearances, 9. Acting and casting, 10. Passage of time, 5. Costuming, 8. Quality of the script, 9. Accuracy, 5. Storytelling, 6. Actually, let me rethink that. Storytelling, 7.
Okay.
Production value, 9. Decision making, 9. Do we care? 9. Okay.
Outward appearances, hair, makeup, and whether they looked like the person, I gave it an 8. Acting and casting, I gave it a 9.5. Passage of time, I gave it a 7. Costuming, I gave it an 8. Quality of the script, I gave it an 8. Accuracy, I gave it a 5. Storytelling, I gave it an 8. Production value, 9. Production, direction, decision making, 9. Do we care? 9. Which brings my tally to 8.05. Do you have any quibbles?
No, and I am an 8, so.
Oh my gosh. So that brings our combined score to...
Yes, 8.025.
Again, by a hair this week.
That means it's time for second opinion, the element we blatantly stole from How Did This Get Made? The prize for scoring above an 8 or below a 4 is that you get to hear us make fun of some IMDb reviewers who disagreed with our assessment of the film.
So I will read you the first one, Sarah. This was a 1 star out of 10 rating written by Randy Unseen on May 24th of 2020. It's a fictional movie, fake news, and they still couldn't make money. Why lie? Are people really this stupid? That's it.
Good questions. I mean, not all of them are good questions, but are people really this stupid is a question I ask myself every single day. Then, shall I read the next one?
Yes, they used one of our favorite words in the title.
Hagiography.
Yes, 1 star out of 10. Take it away.
Hagiography to a Traitor, written by Lynette, February 10th, 2023. This man is being painted as some sort of folk hero, but he was a backstabbing communist with primary loyalty to Joseph Stain's Red regime. This will never be forgotten, no matter how many of these phony puff piece Hollyweird excretes. Having said my thoughts, there is a serious question as fair-minded person might ask themselves. Michael Burnick, who penned a great column on this man, Why the Lies of Trumbo Matter, asks how this film came to be made. The director of the film is Jay Roach, who directed Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery, and Meet the Parents. The screenwriter is John McNamara, who did the TV show Lois and Clark. Both of these gentlemen have skills in storytelling and filmmaking, but they are way out of their league in addressing a serious, complex political topic. How was such a movie greenlighted? Great question. Maybe it required people with limited thinking skills, unable to delve too deeply. I gotta say, I like Jay Roach. I don't know if Meet the Parents is the movie that I would be like, look at the great storytelling skills. There's other things that I would point to.
This reviewer sounds like they would have loved the objectively terrible Reagan movie.
Yeah, they would have loved Reagan.
Either they think they're being very witty by leaving out the L in Stalin, or is it unintentional given that they forgot the apostrophe? And I am being unfair here because it is rather pedantic to pick at people's grammar when you don't like their opinion.
I don't feel like this. I don't feel like this person's opinion is particularly well informed because they name check exactly one story.
Their name check reeks of whataboutism, and I will read the next. This is 2 stars out of 10, written by King Guider 5078 on June 25th of 2016. Title: Pretty awful fluff piece for Cranston. Pretty hammy, poorly acted, written. Hey, when you have to use children to explain the storyline, Daddy, are you a communist? It's pretty telling. This is obviously an ego-boosting fluff piece for Cranston to make people think, yes, he's got so much more in him than just Walt. hard to believe that this actually nominated for a number of awards. Apparently just won the AARP award, though, I guess for people who are too old to follow an actual story without being led by the nose. A stinker, 2 stars are generous. There was so much more in the recent Cohn Hail Caesar about the blacklist and the general tone of the U.S. back then. I guess I did agree with him that the "Are you a communist?" scene with little Nicola on the pony was the weak point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Bryan Cranston. He is just all about the ego-boosting fluff piece. You really, you see how much it's gone to his head, the, 30 years of work to be an overnight success.
Ego-boosting fluff piece.
I like to think that these people with the misspellings in grammar issues came to their keyboards so enraged by what they just saw that they couldn't even see straight. They were just so oh my God, I'm so angry.
As a writer, proofreading your own stuff on the spot is really hard.
It is, but some of these mistakes are the mistakes of someone who's just I'm worked up. Also, who doesn't appreciate being criticized? Person who wrote this is the boomers. So you might want to watch yourself with your AARP award insulting, because they will happily tell you how great they are. Other stuff you should watch instead? Just watch Trumbo and watch anything that Dalton Trumbo wrote. Watch Your Honor. It also has both of my boyfriends in it, and is a train wreck of a show, but it's a delight. So I have nothing else to tell you that you should be watching in place of this. It's delightful. It goes down easy. It's filled with great performances and great moments, and Dalton Trumbo is the king of the word. So I got nothing.
Bruce Cook's biography, there is more where the story about the baby alligator came from. Poor baby alligator.
Poor baby alligator.
Why do people think it's okay to have a baby alligator? It's going to bite you. What's your problem?
There's just there's a whole world of people who love to ship animals.
Next up. Retractions, apologies, and listener mailbag. We have to apologize for something we said in a previous episode that turned out to be misinformation. We are sorry for this. We were wrong. Sometimes we're wrong.
Rena, what were we wrong about?
Sara, I want to apologize for something where we misspoke in the Spartacus episode a few weeks ago. You said that Woody Strode played the trainer, but he actually played Draba, one of the other gladiators.
Wait, so should I actually be apologizing for this?
Yes. I'm said
sorry.
We because I did not want to say, Sara, I want to apologize for something you said.
I mean, you should apologize for me all the time, but I too am sorry that I misstated this. Because, yes, you are correct. Woody Strode actually was one of the other gladiators.
He was the one who heroically throws his trident at Crassus and the other rich mofos and refuses to kill Spartacus. It was a very memorable performance, and he most definitely did not play Marcellus the Horrible Trainer. I don't know how we loused this one up. I don't know.
I know how I loused it up. I thought he was sort of like a helper. Why was he fighting in that case? I don't know. I recall being very certain that he was also teaching. So that's interesting though. And I'm glad that we have corrected this.
Yes, I have an apology as well. I want to apologize for my grade inflation on Spartacus. I gave marks that were too high because I was so swept up by the film's rep. In particular, I am annoyed at myself for giving Spartacus a 9.75 on wardrobe. No 10 for wardrobe is ever going to mean anything coming from me again because I overinflated scores on Spartacus. I gave more 10s than were warranted, but I don't feel like re-recording that episode.
That's amazing.
Why?
I think it was okay.
All right, Sara, can you take us out? And happy birthday again.
Thank you. Happy to take us out. If you like this show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is Biopic a Podcast Story. So do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. And please check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see our official episode ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. And of course, if you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about A Complete Unknown.
Please kill me.
I am not looking forward to this at all.
Do you think he's going to have a brother that died?
I don't care. I had not realized when we started doing this what a high proportion of biopics are about musical stars who lived in the last half century, when what I'm excited about is the full spectrum of history as shown over 110 plus years of movie making and getting an even mix. Happy birthday, Sara.
Me and my Capricorn queen, Joan of Arc, are celebrating.
Yay.
She's such a Capricorn. Good night.
All right. Good night, Sara.